Yeah, baby.
Yeah. The Mac is back. Back with another video. Hello, the initiated. My name is Marcus Junikala, and today we're checking out Kraftur by Soundtheory. Don't actually know how it's pronounced yet again. I suspect it's also Icelandic, since Soundtheory is the company behind Galfoss, which I believe is an Icelandic word, stands for a place. It's like a waterfall, I think. So I would reason that this follows the same naming path. So I guess it would be more like Kraftur if I was Icelandic. Although I need to speak in a deeper voice, be like, channel my inner Viking. Kraftur. Yeah, something like that. In terms of what it means, I have no idea, and I didn't see them actually say it. Maybe we'll bump into it and we'll fill that in. But first and foremost, super excited about this because Soundtheory, they're one of those special companies. They've only had one product so far, which is Galfoss. That's not a tremendous execution of what I wanted to do in my head, but here we go. Yeah, they only have that one product so far, and Galfoss is very good, first of all, and very popular, very respected. Basically like a frequency spectrum optimizer for your individual tracks as well as your mix, and yeah, very, very highly regarded, and also one of the kind of early one of those, you know, frequency spectrum adjusters, basically adjusting your audio, if I remember correctly, in accordance to the Fletcher-Munson curves, which are basically how our ears perceive different frequency areas in volume. So it's kind of like bringing that nicely in tune with the human ear. But yeah, very highly regarded. So super excited to see them come out with another product, because they do take their sweet time, and that probably, hopefully, is an indicator that they put a lot of work and love into what they do. Now, I will have to do a bit of studying for this. I did read a bit of the certainly the website, but also the manual. But I thought we'd go through that together, hand to hand. Maybe that's useful, interesting to some people. If not, there are timestamps in this video, so you can just skip to the audio examples. But you know, I like to take you for the ride with me, and hopefully learn with me. So I will change the view to the website first, which I will say was kind of minimal in terms of what it says about this. If you really want to understand what this is about, I would go to the manual, and in fact, simply on a very kind of quick glance, it did describe it, I'd say, better. So keep that in mind, just my personal opinion. Subtitled Drive Your Sound. So basically they call this something that enriches your mix, allowing you to increase power while preserving the original integrity of its dynamics. And they say there are very little artifacts with this approach. You can add clarity, punch, or pleasant warmth to almost any audio material. So they touch on this being like a mix bus tool, but then you can also put it on individual elements to do kind of frequency specific saturation. And yet again, they emphasize maintaining the quality of your audio signal. And then if you drive this harder, you can go into what they call pleasant distortion. So this is one of those tools that you should really think about as a tool. They very clearly avoid saying that this is a saturator, or this is a clipper, or this is a distortion unit, because again, it can clearly do a bunch of different things. And instead of simply boxing this into one of those categories or another one, it's more useful to understand what it does so you can actually apply it as a more flexible tool in your workflow. And I actually do prefer this approach in many cases. And based on what I've seen so far, this seems to be the right call for me. Then they touch on some of the kind of DSP aspects, minimized aliasing and intermodulation distortion due to oversampling and their DSP algorithms. Then they have this triangular blend control, which you can, see the red triangle there. So basically, you got your dry signal, so that's no Kraftur in the mix. Single band would be that it's chewing on the audio as a whole in a single band, and multi would be these 3 bands that they have from low, mid to high, and you can mix between all of those things. Usually in the tools that I've seen use this so far, the differences are going to be super subtle in many cases, and I find that I usually end up just using, like in this case, I would probably use a mix of the multiband processing mixed with the dry, so I'd get some kind of a balance there. But they do emphasize that the single band approach has its own sound, so you might want to go with that depending on the use case. But certainly the multiband obviously gives you more flexibility. I'm more interested in the mix bus applications, and I think once I understand the mix bus applications better, then I can apply it better on individual tracks as well. But and I should also say I'm definitely still looking for more tools on the mix bus that do what I'm after. My mix bus process is very much still in a kind of I'm still testing a bunch of different things, and I'm erring on the side of going quite minimal. I prefer to do most of my work, if not entirely all of it, in the mix. That's not fair to say entirely, because I do have mix bus stuff, but it's always quite subtle because it's so easy to overdo whatever you do in the mix bus, because it's obviously chewing on everything that's coming in. So still looking for tools for that, and I'm extremely interested in learning if this can do something for me in that process. They have a match mode which dynamically compensates for loudness, so you can hear what this is doing without fooling your ears. Fantastic inclusion. This should be a standard. This should be a staple, so especially with a tool like this. So yeah, fantastic to have it there. You have those 3 frequency bands, like we said, low, mid, and high. You can control their individual distortion curves and the frequency ranges. So you can choose the overlap points between those. Very important. And then they kind of talk about this vision tone color rendering pipeline, which apparently is based on human perception. So it did look pretty sweet. I saw a glimpse of that when I pressed play accidentally when I was setting up this demo recording. But I should say this is a blind demo. I haven't been actually using this at all or hearing what it does. So you will get my authentic response. Interface overview. Again, the triangle is basically your mix control. Band controls up on the top. Then you can see the transfer curves on the screen as well. Match bypass controls. Got some metering stuff here. Pretty basic. Drive control, offset, and knee control. All right, and then the band shifts. So I guess that controls the emphasis, relative emphasis of those bands. And then this website kind of stops. So I think they could, especially with a tool like this, include a bit more of those components from the manual to this website. I feel like with a tool like this, you want to Obviously, you want to start out light, and as you dive deeper into the page, it gets more complex. I understand that they want to avoid information overload, but this doesn't, to my taste, quite convert customers due to the lack of information. For this kind of a tool, I would be looking for more. I understand this is a very new release, so they're probably still working on this, and maybe they want to include some videos in here as well. Then they have some statements from different people here. But yeah, some praise the analogness of it. And yeah, that sounds like a very decent praise. But yeah, that's it. That's the website there. I'm gonna go ahead and open you the manual here, and then I'm actually gonna go ahead and close Chrome so we save the resources. So let's dig in here a bit further. We got some system requirements here. You can look them up yourself, but it seems pretty standard. So again, here, a sentence that I think would be useful in the web page as well. Approach to loudness, enhancement, and saturation. This is a really good description. And they say, engineer to increase the loudness of your mix while preserving the original integrity of dynamics. So again, this is a praise that, or a description that a lot of companies make. You know, I think if there is a company that's in the conversation of fulfilling those promises, Soundtheory is definitely in there. And then if you push Kraftur more, you can enrich your sound with color and warmth. Subtle but pleasing distortion. So these descriptions definitely are on the side of like that analog magic, that mojo that we are so often chasing. Initially designed as a mastering tool, makes sense. They say equally effective in adding frequency-specific saturation to individual elements. All right. And again, increased power of signal while containing signal peaks. Talk a bit about the workflow, made to be as intuitive as possible. Then they talk about the bands and how they decrease intermodulation distortion. Fair enough. This is also a pretty important box here, making you understand what the dry and single and multi are. Maybe that's obvious for some people, but some people will be asking what those are, that those refer to bands and not like, I don't know, cores, for example. But yes, bands. So that kind of clarifies it. If you want to use 3 bands at the same time and go for that more, fine-tuned sound, then you go for multi. What I would usually do with these is I go 100% on the thing that I want to edit and get it to as perfect of a place as possible. And then I usually pull back from that to the dry signal to see whether there is an area in between that is actually an improved version of that processing. And then you also hear what it does in relation to the dry signal. So that's how I usually like to work, because I want to hear what the processing is doing sort of first maximally, and then pull back on that processing, and then pull back on the wetness of that signal to blend it in if that seems to be the best way forward. Then they talk about the multiband processors. On the left side, it's this box over here. They recommend traversing these, which means going through them in an order of a top-down approach. So going from low to mid to highs. The drive parameter should be adjusted so that some of the input signal is entering the saturation region. How much the signal should be in this region depends on whether Kraftur is being used as a loudness enhancer or as a saturation distortion tool. All right. Input signal is entering the saturation region. So I suppose visually we can then see how much is going into the saturation. It doesn't explain it here, but I hope it will be clear enough as once we go in there. Offset and knee parameters can be used to control how the processor treats the loudness parts of the signal, namely the transients. Cool. And again, for those who don't know, transients are the brief energy bursts in a signal that are sort of separate from the different body of it. So in a drum, for example, you get the snap, and then you have the body of the drum, for example. So the initial loud energy bursts of the signal. The shift parameters allow more flexible control over the amount of saturation applied to each band when operating in multiband. So yeah, this allows you to distribute the amount of I suppose the drive. Well, they say saturation. So yeah, you can go lesser on a certain region if you, for example, don't want to go so hard on the low frequencies and you want to go hotter on the mids. So that's useful. Once the desired effect is achieved, the user can engage the match button and toggle the bypass button to compare the difference between the processed and unprocessed signal without being influenced by the loudness. So yeah, that's a really important feature. Then again, they go through the interface as we did on the website. Let's see if we can find. Let's read about drive. Adjusts the level of the input into the single band and multiband processors. So again, this is depending on your mix balance. Increasing drive will result in increased loudness of the process signals while potentially inducing saturation. All right. This parameter does not influence the level of the dry signal. Good. The offset knee parameters adjust the shape of the transfer curves across all bands. Okay. Increasing either parameter increases the softness of the curve. Okay. Offset influences a broader segment of the curve, whereas knee concentrates around the saturation region. All right, interesting. Offset and knee can additionally be modified by dragging on regions of the graph which do not intersect with the transfer curves. Cool. When you're processing in multiband mode, position of the transfer curves for each band can be adjusted with the respective shift parameters. Makes sense. Okay, so you drive it more and it drives it more. When you lessen it, it's less. Makes sense? Transition frequencies, usually the way I like to approach those is have an analyzer there and look at where most of my energy is shifting. You can see the low end usually pretty easily and then see the crossover point to the mids, and usually the same thing for the high end. Obviously it takes some experience and you know to see those and know how they relate to what it actually sounds like, but usually pretty simple. You can solo the bands, clip, linearly combining the outputs of the multiband and single band processors. The dry signal may result in a signal that exceeds 0 dB full scale. Oh no. However, with clipping enabled, the output undergoes a final soft clipping stage, which effectively limits the signal to remain below the clipping ceiling. Cool. Nice. Then you can adjust that clipping ceiling, output gain, fair enough, bypass. Okay. I think we are peak histogram. Okay, well that's it. I think we are sufficiently educated. And here is Kraftur itself. Let's go ahead and close that manual. Cool. Now the boring, tedious stuff is out of the way, hopefully. I'm going to take myself to Studio One. I have a track here that you've heard before on some plugin demos, which is again from the soundtrack for the video game Breachway. Still working on this. This one I've done a bit more EQ balancing here, so the experience should be a bit better for you. I think this is still one of the better ones to be using for demos here. So we'll continue using that. I will say this track in the percussion has some particular challenges in how the high frequencies compound, how they basically layer on top of one another. So this might give Kraftur a bit of a tough nut to crack. And since we are demonstrating this as a master bus processing tool, we do have to keep that in mind. So I might have to jump into some of the individual tracks to pull back on some elements. But again, this is often a thing you learn when you're working on the master bus. You realize that there are things you want to change in the mix rather than on the master bus. So bear with me as we sort that out, as we figure that out. But let's bypass Kraftur. And also for context, I have a bit of OX Sound Bloom on the mix bus to kind of balance out the frequency balance here. That's first on my master bus. Then I have Kraftur. Then I actually have a limiter after that. And I think that's how I want to be using this, at least. And I would suspect I didn't at least see any comments on, where they would recommend using this in a sort of a more typical clinical way. But I would suspect this is where it goes. This isn't a clipper, and oftentimes those are recommended after a limiter. Again, there's no one single way of doing it, but this is not like a clipper. It does have that soft clipping tool at the end of it, but that's a very different thing to a dedicated clipper plugin. So that's my chain for this. Again, Kraftur is turned off. Ooh, when you hover on this text, it lights up. Oh shit. Okay, it doesn't show my code. That's good. I was scared I would have to edit this out. So version, website, license managed by Pace iLock, colors by Soundtheory, vision tone. So maybe this is a thing they're going to sell for other companies as well if they want to use it. Dynamic range, HDR, SDR, color scheme. Ooh. Oh, this amber is... I like it. Maybe a bit challenging for the eyes, especially here in the dark studio. Borealis, that's very 80s. I mean, this is also very 80s. Dark, okay. Glacier. This harkens back to the older Soundtheory days. Light, okay. Minimal. How does dark... I actually maybe prefer that. Vintage. Oh, that's... I love this 80s approach. Volcano, warm. Okay, we're going to go with... Let's just go with the dark, which is the default. But that's there apparently as well. So, Kraftur off. We'll listen to what we're dealing with here. So that's the track. This is going maybe a tad bit hot. So I actually want to... let's change a reference here real quick and go for let's go for that track. And adjust that. Yeah, that's definitely going a bit hotter than I'd probably want to go for, but it shouldn't actually affect the Kraftur side of things here. So that's what we're dealing with. I actually want to check out this track. Nope, I want to check out this track. Yep, and on that one, I think we do want to treat some of the low end first. Yeah, so what I've just done there is low pass some of that low end. Could be that I'll blend some of it back in there, but I felt like that was pushing forward a bit too much here. So, cool. Let's, what I'll do here is I'm going to actually max out the multi-core setting here. Well, that's nice. It kind of turns into an arrow when you do that. Interesting interface. We're going to go max on the multi-core so we can hear what it's doing. And we could actually also, I'm going to pull the Pro Q3 over here. And I want to sort of see the frequency crossover points that I want to focus on for this track. So let's go ahead with that first. Kraftur is still bypassed. So about 130 is actually here, where I want to probably set the low mid crossover point. Does it actually have a... Ooh. Okay, so 100 hertz is the lowest that it goes. So I think another point could be, can I, yep, we'll go 280 on that one. Seems like a good crossover point. And then we'll actually keep the 3500 hertz. Seems like a pretty decent spot there. So, okay, we've set our crossover points to our best estimates here. Obviously, you can adjust them as you move along. And you might want to do that because, you know, if the lows are blowing out this thing, you want to adjust that. But we also have the low shift for it. So that's one thing. But the frequency obviously controls what gets into that area. But I would do that first. We'll see here you have a single band control here, control as well. Does it not engage? I don't understand why that is. Nothing's happening when I'm clicking on it. Maybe it's not supposed to be a box. Looks like a box to me. Oh, maybe I need to have a plugin actually on. Nope. No, still doesn't go. Okay, multi-set to 100. We got our frequency areas set. So let's start just pushing this. And again, very important here, I'm not trying to make this sound good necessarily right out of the gate. What I like to do with plugins is push them to the boundaries, because when you push them to the boundary, you actually understand what the plugin is about. You understand its limits, you understand its character. When you push it harder, that character becomes revealed. Now, then obviously as you pull back, those same characteristics and qualities are going to be there, but to a lesser extent. So this is my point here. Hopefully at the end we'll arrive at a good balance, but just bear that in mind as we begin to push this thing. Okay, so first impressions, even at like 4 or 5 dB, which is obviously quite a bit, still very easily we're getting a lot of loudness here, and not anything nasty stuff. I think I want to, because the way to demonstrate this, I think I will change my limiter approach here a bit. So I'll actually change the limiter that I have. I will set it to a very transparent setting here, and I will keep it here on the side. So some of the portions of this now might be quieter to you, but we're dealing with a tool that is dealing with loudness. So what I want to do is find a good setting for Kraftur without blowing up the limiter that follows it, so you get an idea of what Kraftur actually does, and then we can set the limiter to a decent place, if at all, to get a sort of more commercial level here. So let's do that. I feel like that's far more fair and useful for everybody involved. So yeah, let's go with that. Okay, so here at this point, we're pushing over 10 dB drive here. You begin to hear it start emphasizing some of the mid frequencies there, so we get more of that honkiness in here. And we got those sounds that will easily err on the side of those kind of mid perhaps undesirable qualities. So that's worth keeping in mind, because obviously Kraftur will emphasize what's in the audio, so it's not innate to the quality or the nature of this plugin itself. But we begin to hear how it accentuates those certain frequency areas. So what I would actually be tempted to do at this point would be to adjust the mid shift. By the way, there's a link button here, which is interesting, because does it work if I adjust these like this and then link them? Ooh, that is actually pretty sweet and very interesting. Yeah, if I double click it resets them. Perfect. Great. Let's go with my intuition here. They say go in the order of these shifts, but I just want to see for myself if this is how it works. So I'll begin to push the drive once again first, and then I'll adjust the mid shift. Okay, that's sounding really cool. how it pushes, how it saturates is very, very nice there. That's very, very interesting. Let's play a bit more with that. Again, this is a good example of what I mean by pushing it to the extreme to hear what it does. First of all, what I love about this is that all of these changes, all of them, we've done 2 controls here so far, none of this goes to the zone of, like, obviously, like, just broken and overblown. Like, this is still a very, okay, it's an extreme sound. I would not go for this, but you can still hear that it's dare I say musical sounding. Like it's a very, you're going too deep, that's what she said, but it doesn't become completely unusable. It just becomes like a very extreme quality. What I really love, as we push this mid shift here, you can begin to hear this kind of very pleasant crackling and popping and sort of grittier graininess, which I actually really like. So this is very, and what I love is that oftentimes when you have these different individual shifts for different frequency areas, it can be very difficult to find a balance where everything works, because when you adjust one area, then that tends to have kind of implications to another one, and then it can be very difficult to hear what you're actually doing. And once you're making one tweak, then you're affecting the perception of the other area. So it can be very difficult to find a balance that you know works, that you hear works, and you don't get accumulation in certain frequency areas. This, again, we haven't touched 2 different areas at the same time, but just adjusting this, I can very clearly hear what I'm doing. And I can very easily tell, okay, that's good, that's not, that's what I like, that's what I don't. By the way, this I know they mentioned was it vision tone many times? This looks fantastic. This is super nice to be using. And it has this kind of like weird blurring lag, which kind of goes with the 80s style, but I actually really like the way it looks. I don't know if that translates with the video capture. Hopefully it does, but this is really nice to look at. So let's do what they say, and let's go through these shifts in order. So we'll keep drive at about 10. We're gonna play with the offset and knee next. Again, talking about extreme moves to hear what's actually happening. Actually really like that we can, it's not fair to say like a subtle difference, because at the extreme ends we can hear the nature of it very much changes. It doesn't become this as abrupt shifter, but it's rather like a smoother transition. I think it's going to be more useful for us to return to these once we have some kind of a balance going on here. But again, the visual feedback here is really, really good. This can be difficult to understand if you haven't played with compressors that allow you to do similar things. If you have that experience, that will lend itself very nicely to this unit. But yeah, basically with the knee, you can see that the nature of the curvature changes in a more shall I say, aggressive end at especially at the top. You see that transitional part at the top really flatten out, where with the offset it doesn't do that. It kind of changes the... I'm not going to use terms here because I'm just going to butcher this anyway, but let's go with the shifts first. We'll come back to the offset. Well, I'm hoping the audible difference will be greater. Again, when we max these out, we can clearly hear the difference, but obviously we are in a mix bus situation, probably going to be far more conservative with those. Especially with the knee there, you can hear this generalized, not sharpness, but it's sort of more aggressive in the way it behaves. Whereas I really like the smoothness of this very soft knee here. That's a super pleasant sound to me, even with these basic settings. Let's go into the shifts. Okay, very interesting. As you can definitely hear, as we push this to the max, we're now allowing this to saturate those low ends more. And you can hear it turn into this kind of mush. And again, what I like is that the effects are very, relatively, maybe that's not the right word. They're musical for sure. You can hear that we lose the cohesion and the firmness and the punch of the low end, but it very clearly turns it into something else, which again makes it easier to understand what this is doing. And the results aren't, they don't seem to ever be bad. They're just of a certain character or nature or not. Obviously I would consider this to be bad in a musical context. I wouldn't do that, but it changes shape. And then when it changes shape, you can make a decision and a judgment of whether it is a good or bad thing for your music. But I like that it's very clearly understandable and hearable. Is that even a word? I don't know what it does. And then you can make decisions. And it doesn't just, this isn't like it just boom overblows with distortion and everything like booms and distorts to shit. This doesn't do that, which is absolutely fantastic, because it's that makes decision making very difficult, because you might be improving something in a certain area and then making something worse in another. This doesn't do that to me. So again, let's turn the shift into a more radical place, and then you can hear the low end kind of turns into this granular saturation mush, which is actually, again, is super interesting sound, but not what I would do for a mix bus. Can hear it becomes this kind of like a gritty, grainy energy there. It's really interesting and strange sound. Let's play with the offset and knee when we're in that extreme place, so maybe we can hear a bit more difference. probably the low end there is not the best way to demonstrate that, because it's definitely going to be the least audible in terms of behavior in relation to that. But I'll actually try and do something. No, fuck it. We're not going to do anything reasonable. Let's go to the high shift and try the same thing. This is actually going to be super interesting. So, very interesting stuff. This is a far more subtle than I even expected. The changes there are far more audible in the mid and the low shift. Definitely the most, I'd say, in the mids. For good reason, because our hearing is sort of focused on that area. The high shift, very interesting stuff, because it's very subtle in this case. And this is like, in fact, that we have this track that kind of has the challenge of don't push the percussive high end too much because it becomes brittle and annoying, which is definitely the challenge in this mix. This is actually helping that a lot because it softens up the edges. And even at this very extreme setting, this would not be something I would consider to be too much. This would be actually quite desirable. So that's very, very, very interesting stuff. I want to play with that a bit more. That's really great sounding. This is actually might be something that I've been looking for years, because one of the challenges I've had in my mixes is the accumulation of kind of the brittleness, the harshness, the coldness in the high frequency range, going from, let's say, about the maybe 4K mark upwards, not so much in the very, very high frequencies, but let's say going from maybe that 3.5 point to about 8-10K. And I've been looking for things. Obviously there are a number of things that I should and can be doing to fix that in a mix, and I've done those in the past few years. But this is a really, really sweet sound because it saturates and kind of, again, in a good way, mushes up the transient edge of those sounds. Very pleasant smoothness to that sound. So yeah, I am very impressed by that. That's a very this would be like a high fidelity tool for me. It's not like a super it's an apparent effect in the context of listening to a full mix, but it's not like as drastic of a thing as you know, many of the other tools out there. So very super excited about this. So again, let's keep the multi-core approach here to 100. Again, to find out, first of all, if we can get to a good balance with just a 100% multi-core, and then we can pull back to the dry, more to the dry signal to see if we can land on a better solution. But let's go through these all. First, I think for me, the order here, unless I can imagine that as I'm using this on the mix bus, especially once I know a project sort of more thoroughly, I can know that it lends itself well to a certain knee behavior. For this kind of thing though, I'm getting kind of the vibes in terms of the sound that I want to pull out of this is that I would err on the side of a softer knee rather than a harder one. Because again, on the mix bus, I tend to make things maybe a bit too hard sounding. So this will definitely assist me in getting that balance right. Hearing the offset, definitely much harder here, but I think we can manage. So pulling the drive, let's pull it upwards, and then I'll go in order: low shift, mid shift, high shift, and I'll just try and land on a decent balance for my ears. I do have a bit of ear fatigue already for today, unfortunately, but I think we can manage here. So let's get going. So I think that 10 dB is a pretty happy medium to be sitting in. Let's go into the low shift. So about there, again, I like to go to those extremes to get an idea of where the edge lies. So usually I go from less effect to more, and then I find the point where I hear the difference. I go, okay, that's whatever it is. And then I go to the extreme end and pull back. And once I feel like, okay, it's arriving to a nicer place, then I basically look at the differences between those perceptions and usually go for something in between. That's not a hard set rule for me, but it's a good way of mitigating. I can't speak for whatever reason. Mitigating this, because we so often fall prey to our own perceptional quirks. When something is accentuated, the extreme of it will appear in a certain way, and vice versa, going from like a subtle to a more extreme. We're not very good at estimating or perceiving kind of a good balance between things when we're coming from the extremes. So usually it's a good idea to assume that neither one of those perceptions, when you're coming from one to the other, is as truthful as you think it is. And oftentimes, like when you're listening to or working on your music, it's a good idea to also assume that it's not as shit as you think it is and not as good as you think it is, which in a mixing context allows you to be sort of more subtle in your movements, which often generally tends to be a good idea. I don't know if that was a very useful rambling, but something worth thinking about maybe. Cool. cool. So that probably sits somewhere there. You can hear, again, in the low end, we have this kind of a big boomy percussion, but it does have a slightly hard edge to it. And I feel like this just takes the edge off, gives you some of that puffiness there, but it doesn't, because what happens when you push this too far, you begin to lose basically your low end. You lose that low end power. So I would probably keep it somewhere there. Let's go into the mid shift. So there you can definitely hear that it takes, again, the hard edge off from some of the top end of those percussive elements. They can come off as a bit too hard. So this is a very nice way of smoothing out some of those rough edges. Probably land somewhere there. Let's go into the high shift. Cool. I would probably, let's go into the knee and offset here. So there, definitely want to be careful of not losing too much energy. And again, if you get lost in decision making and you don't know what to do, principle I really like to deploy is, again, obviously do the extremes and ask yourself which one is better. So if you think, okay, more drastic offset is going to be better, then your answer is definitely going to be closer to that rather than the extreme end. So you can conclude that your answer is going to be somewhere between 50% and 0%. So, and then you can go from 0 to 50 and again conclude which one is better and vice versa. And this is a really useful way of going through your mixing process. If you get lost in decision making, you know, just break it down into the simplest components of better or worse, A, B, and, you know, move forward. So again, here we lose a bit of that transient response there. So I'd probably continue keeping the offset at its sort of more drastic end. So again, I'm listening to that first transient hit with the full mix so I can get an idea of how this attacks that biggest brunt of energy. Again, this track benefits from having that power there, but I feel like the slight knee takes off a bit of that edge and kind of softens it. Because the benefit from the softer knee here seems to be that it kind of gives a thicker, fuller sound. So you're going to have to kind of make decisions about the trade-offs here. Cool. I want to now press match, which should match our output level. And we can see what the difference is here. And again, here we don't have the limiter engaged, so I will go ahead and add level to this to take it to a more commercial level. And for context, I'm leaving a bit of space here for the limiter, so we're not getting this might be a bit quieter than it would otherwise be, but I don't want to slam the limiter at all. I don't actually want to flatten any peaks here, so I'm saving a bit of like a dB or maybe maybe a dB on the limiter, so we can just listen to Kraftur as much as possible. So really, really interesting stuff. Again, the way we're doing it is more like a precision tool kind of approach. Very, very interesting things. Again, this is whether a tool is how it's sounding is completely contextual to your aims as an engineer. So again, here, what I can hear is that there's a bit of there has to be decisions to be made as a mixing engineer, as a mastering engineer, of what you want to trade off for. So we're definitely getting more perceived loudness, that's for sure. When we're bypassing Kraftur, without Kraftur, we have a bit of a more cohesive stereo image. Like there's more separation, there's a bit more sort of holographicness to it, more like a three-dimensional thing, which makes sense because we are saturating here and we are, a fair bit driving this sound. So what we're gaining is that fullness, that body, that impact, that perceived loudness, but we are trading that with this approach. And that's, again, not to say that Kraftur can't maintain the 3D-ness of your mix, because I'm sure it can. You just go more subtle, which, by the way, we haven't done yet. We are kind of, even if it's a precision tool, and this approach is relatively similar to that. We still haven't, for example, pulled back on the wetness of this. Yeah, I mean, it's what was my point here? Again, you're going to have to, make decisions about what you want to do as an engineer. And what I'm loving here, once again, is that I can hear every bit of difference very clearly, and it's very traceable. So I don't have to be in the dark of, is this, because sometimes when you put like a saturator on, especially in the cases where it's modeling, let's say, a specific unit and it doesn't have a ton of controls on it, you're oftentimes gaining something in your sound, but then there also might be some qualities in there that are not so desirable. Oftentimes is the case that you can gain with a saturator, like an analog modeling saturator, you can gain, punch and again, size and thickness, but then maybe there's that tiny thing in the mid-range that kind of bothers you. A bit too much accumulation in a certain area, and maybe that unit you can't kind of de-emphasize that part of that processing. And then if you try and EQ it, maybe before, maybe after that unit, it doesn't quite land on as sort of a, I guess, cohesive sound. So with this, everything is very traceable. And as I've gone through these different settings, I know where each and every single one of these qualities comes from. So I can go in there and do less of it. Again, I want to do a bit more A/Bing in case something new comes up. Yeah, definitely with my past, we lose quite a bit of excitement here. So again, it would need to be a balancing act of how I would deploy this in this specific case, assuming that this would be my final mix, which it is not. But again, excitement, punch, fullness disappearing. But again, when we have this on these settings, we do lose some of that kind of positive sharpness and separation here in the mix. It also calms down the mix a lot, which again, whether it's a good or a bad thing, what you gain is more cohesiveness, more the relative balance between the frequency spectrums. They play nicer with one another. It kind of nicely calms it down, but maybe you would want to pull back on certain aspects to, make it more exciting if that's what you wanted to do. Yeah, so yeah, I mean, I'm super impressed by this and it's very evident to me that as I begin to play with this a lot more, I can land on the happy medium. I can land on the solution that I'm happy with. So let's play with this a bit more. I'm going to pull this balance back from the 100% multiband setting to the dry. And again, we have this visual feedback here for that to hear the difference. again, this is a good way of introducing some of that more sharpness, some of that separation and clarity, if you will, back into it, which is this actually working pretty nicely. Again, I'm going to do like a A/B with this setting to the bypassed version. Yeah, that's like such a clear improvement. And this is just like an intuitive first pass test here. So that's very impressive. I also love how this view engages when you actually bypass the plugin, because a lot of the time these can easily be missed. Then you're wondering, like, why is my work not working? And you realize something was bypassed. So this is very nice. Seems like a minute user interface detail, but this is super great. Grays out everything and has this big text here. So that's super useful. Again, I want to A/B this a couple more times. Yeah. Again, what I love about this is that I can clearly hear what it gives me and what kind of changes it's doing. So I can go and adjust there. Again, for a final mix, I would probably want to maintain a bit more of that punch and separation, but the fullness and the body and the impact this gives is very nice. Again, I very much feel like this is gonna patch a hole in my boat, because again, with the saturator approach so far, I haven't found one thing that kind of can always do what I'm looking for. Again, there's like a trade-off, and oftentimes it's in the mid-range. You get like too much of emphasis in a certain area, and then you're gonna have to adjust your EQ to make it work, which again is perfectly fine, but an additional hurdle you have to figure out. And also many tools that aim to increase perceived loudness. Clippers, been super subtle so far, because I feel like they can really easily sort of grainify and distort and kind of like just harshen out your mixes very easily. Again, this is depends on the genre, depends on the use, etc. But I'm super excited about this because it does precisely a lot of what I'm looking for. Is there anything else you want to touch on here? We've been probably going for quite long now. Yeah, over an hour here. Probably not. I'll probably leave it at that. And we might return to this even later on, in case, I come to discover even more stuff about this. I guess what I do want to do here before we wrap up is let's set this to the 50% mark. I want to adjust the shifts just a bit more to see if I can get to where I want to be. Yeah, I mean, even just putting this to the 0 dB range, it's like you just lose a lot of that punch right there. Yeah, kind of the fullness, the body, the size. And again, I'm impressed how it takes like there's the toms, and you get the kind of the weird grainy thing there. It's super nice how it does it. It's not a desirable outcome that I would aim for, but the fact that the sound of it still remains so musically contextual is super impressive. Yeah, I just love how once you set your settings, get to kind of a good spot, you just pull it back, get a bit of that wet signal back in there. You're gonna land on the perfect thing. Cool. Yeah, I think we're gonna call it here. I think this has been going for long enough, and I don't want to repeat myself overly. But long story short. Super impressed. I will have to say that this is, let me try and think about this. Is there anything that I would even compare this to? Anything that comes close to this use case before I make my statement here? Nope. I think I'm gonna say it. This is the best mix bus or mastering saturator that I've used. You know, there are cases where you want to have, again, like in specific analog modeling unit that does a specific sound, and those usually they need to slot into your workflow, so you know how you feed the compression and the EQ balance into that saturator, and it's going to sound great. That's fantastic. That approach has not fulfilled all of my heart's desires for a master bus saturator. And like I said, again, many of the clippers don't quite do what it is that I'm after. So this kind of, like, I know again this is not a clipper tool, but this kind of does a bit of what good compression does, what a good saturation does, and what a good clipper does. Like, this definitely helps you maximize loudness. It increases the body and the impact of your sound, which is kind of the compression-ish quality. And then you can also, if you want to, like, you can subtly push this and you can get those very pleasing saturation qualities again. And this is not something you'd even realize on a finished record. Like, the saturation is so precise and subtle and mature and very, polished. I guess mature would be the best way of putting that. But this kind of does the best of all those three components. And simply the clipper aspect comes from the loudness maximizing. But yeah, I'm this is going straight on the master bus. This just sounds fantastic. And to me, the fact that, you know, you can use this and it can be at an extreme setting and it will not sound like what you want to have on a record, but nothing sounds bad. It can be too much or too little, but everything sounds super musical and very good. And it's even at extreme settings as we're using this, it never like completely just blows out your master bus, which is a sign for me of a very mature, very balanced, very professional precision tool that is musical. And that's really probably the highest praise I can give. But I'm thrilled that this is now out there, that this exists, because like I said, it patches so many things that I've been looking for and I don't quite get from any of the other tools that I have, and I have a lot. So yeah, I think this has been kind of like an evolution point in certainly master bus saturation, loudness, processing, and I mean every single word of that. I'm not trying to be too dramatic, but yeah, and this very much fits the way I like to think about audio processing and applying saturation, certainly at a mix bus location. Again, we didn't use this on individual tracks. I'd be very interested in seeing how that turns out. Again, it would probably be I would probably approach using this in a sort of more subtle enhancement way, but that will be interesting to see how it kind of plays in the context of a full mix and how it kind of sums to the master bus. But I'd imagine this is every bit of a precision tool there as it would be on on your master bus. So very nice. And also the like I said, some of the extreme settings. Now that I think about it, if I was like using, let's say I had a snare drum section for an orchestral thing, if I wanted to add some of that like grit and that elusive, pleasant, grainy distortion thing, I might actually like push the drive and the mid shift to get some of those out. Who knows? I don't know. We'll have to experiment on that. But high praise, highly recommend, at least for my way of thinking, my way of structuring my processing on the mix bus. This nails it. So those are my thoughts on this. All right, that's it for the video. If you have this at home or at your studio, let me know what you think about it, and let me know what you think of this video. And also, by the way, I should thank Soundtheory for sending this over, which I forgot to actually say. But yes, full transparency, I did send them an email saying I would love to check it out. They said yes. They sent me a copy of this. That's all they did. I'm not being paid to make this video otherwise. And I wasn't asked to say anything one way or the other, nor would I ever do that. So all opinions here are my own, both in good and bad. But thank you to Soundtheory for sending a copy of this over. Again, let me know what you think of this video. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time. Finished.